implementing a mathematical model to compare oxygen uptake kinetics between cyclists and non-cyclists during steady state. Department of Kinesiology, Midwestern State University, Wichita Falls, Texas, and Department of Health and Exercise Science, Louisiana Tech University, Ruston, Louisiana. Introduction. Endurance physical activities are limited by the capacity of the respiratory and circulatory system to deliver oxygen to the working muscles. Such activities are classified as cardiorespiratory or aerobic endurance activities. The degree to which the system limits one's performance is based on various factors such as the intensity of the exercise, duration of the activity, and the amount of activated muscle contraction involved. These areas of limitation may be modeled to provide information for future adaptation responses and identifying areas of risk. In general, low intensity and long duration activities such as distance running or cycling have reduced activated muscle contraction and are generally limited by oxygen utilization capacity. On the other hand, high intensity and short duration activities such as weightlifting require large amounts of activated muscle contractions. These activities are classified as anaerobic activities, allowing for energy production outside cellular mitochondria. However, there are activities such as soccer and basketball that may fall in between the classified aerobic and anaerobic activities. The energy required for such activity comes from the combination of aerobic and anaerobic sources. It could thus be argued that all endurance activities use and transition between both aerobic and anaerobic components of energy production. Researchers have investigated the role of O2 uptake kinetics during exercise. Storino et al. Studied the kinetics of O2 uptake in the transition of exercise and found that the VO2 measured in the transition of exercise near or above peak VO2 would be slower than those for subventilatory threshold exercise. Moreover, several studies have demonstrated that a physiological measurement, such as maximum oxygen uptake, VO2 max, is a useful predictor of success in endurance performance. Mathematical models of bioenergetic processes have been developed to guide training and predict performance more accurately. The first theoretical model of human bioenergetics during exercise was proposed by Margeria in 1976 and was later implemented mathematically by Morton. This study included three sources of energy for the body and was tested with VO2 uptake responses to a step input in work rate, WR. Although this model helped to understand the origin of anaerobic threshold during the incremental exercise, it did not quantitatively account for the behavior of the glycolytic process. To provide a framework for the analysis of the processes involved in ATP regulation, the mathematical model of these human bioenergetic systems at rest has been recently developed to permit quantitative evaluation of the responses to exercise. The enhanced model permits the analysis of O2 uptake kinetics in various tissue compartments and blood, which allows testing of hypotheses in the context of a system model as opposed to separate compartmental models. The structure of the human bioenergetic system model is described by Cabrera et al. The inputs for this model are the inspired oxygen concentration and WR. The outputs for this model are alveolar oxygen and carbon dioxide concentrations, heat, and water. The tissue compartments include the skeletal muscle, M, representing the working muscles in the lower extremities, splanchnic, a region representing liver and visceral other tissues, which include brain, heart, adipose tissue, alveolar, which includes lungs as a gas exchanger, and heart as a pump. Within this model, the main substrate pools indicate the direction of conversion processes. Most reactions between two substrates such as glycogen, glucose, fatty acids, glycerol, pyruvate, lactate, La, and alanine are coupled for the formation of oxidized form of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD, for the reduced form of nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NADH, and adenosine triphosphate, ATP, or adenosine diphosphate, ADP. The variable regulation by each of these origins of is ATP. A step change in ATP turnover because the change in WR is the model input. It is assumed that the only skeletal muscle can adapt its rate of ATP production and oxygen consumption to the WR level. The alveolar space simply solves for a gas exchanger. At rest, ATP homeostasis is maintained by matching ATP synthesis to the equivalent of the resting metabolic rate. During exercise, AWR input induces changes in O2 uptake, blood flow, and enzyme levels to supply the required fuels the exercise muscles to maintain ATP consistency. Regulation occurs when a system maintains ATP within narrow bounds over time despite fluctuations in external conditions, i.e. workload. During exercise, it is assumed that the changes in oxygen uptake VO2 are mainly because of the muscle's rate of O2 use. Therefore, the steady state VO2 requirement, VO2 WR, during exercise of moderate intensity on a cycle ergometer, CE, depends on the WR and can be expressed as the following equation. VO2 WR equals VO2 rest plus VO2 unloaded plus alpha WR. Whereas VO2 rest, the oxygen uptake at rest, VO2 unloaded is the oxygen uptake increase above rest during unloaded cycling. Alpha is the conversion factor representing the ratio. VO2 and change in WR is moderate intensity ranges above the unloaded pedaling, assuming that 6 mole of ATP are formed for each mole of O2 consumed, and that most energy at rest is derived aerobically. If the body consumes 11.2 millimoles of O2 per minute at resting, ATP turnover rate is 67 moles of ATP per minute. The VO2 response to a step WR input is expressed as the following. VO2 time equals VO2 work rate 1 minus E is the T minus TD over O2, whereas T alpha is the time delay for the appearance of changes in VO2 from the time at which the step changes in the input WR is applied. As T increases, VO2 will reach steady state values. The time taken to reach steady state values, VO2 WR, is determined by the time constant TO2. Though there has been extensive research in the study of gas exchange kinetics, the quantitative analysis of how specific treatment influences the outcome of training program is still under investigation. The purpose of our research is twofold. First, to compare the oxygen uptake kinetics between cycling and non-cyclists using cycloergometry, looking specifically at the steady-state condition, and to use a mathematical model to investigate the phase response of oxygen uptake kinetics during submaximal levels of steady state and compare this model to the aforementioned actual oxygen uptake kinetics of subjects. Methods. Upon arrival, the subjects filled out the required consent and questionnaire forms. The demographic data of the subjects included height and weight, lactate analyzer, IQ Sport, Hawthorne, New York, USA, and metabolic car, Sensomedics, Homestead, Florida, USA, VMAX 29, were calibrated before each exercise CE test. Heart rate, HR beats per minute, was measured with a 12-lead electrocardiograph. Blood pressure was recorded by oscillating using a sphygmomanometer and a stethoscope. Blood lactate was measured by and analyzed through reflectance photometry. Body weight percentage was calculated from measures using skinfold calipers, and a 3-site skinfold protocol resting values were taken before the exercise CE test. Each subject was positioned at the same CE with a 10-degree angle at the knee ganometer, while the crank arm of the pedal was perpendicular to the floor. Subjects were allowed to warm up for approximately 10 minutes on the Monarch CE. After a warm-up, the graded exercise test, GXT, was administered until the subjects reached volitional fatigue. The testing protocol was modified, a strand protocol consisting of an initial workload of 50 watts for 4 minutes. Subsequent stages were 4 minutes in length with a 5-watt increase at each stage. The modification of stage length to 4 minutes was to allow for steady state during each state without undue fatigue during later, more intense stages. During the course of the experiment, HR, oxygen uptake, and expired ventilation, BE, were monitored and recorded continuously. At the end of each stage, the subjects were questioned about their rating of perceived exertion using the Borg scale, 6 to 20. Blood LA was taken at the first and third minutes of each stage from the finger stick using approximately 10 to 20 and analyzed through their refractance photometry. The test was terminated upon the subject's request or accordance to the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines for test termination. The subjects were then allowed to cool down post-test to provide a safe recovery from the exertion. Subjects. The CE tests were conducted on two groups of subjects, CS and NCs, 12 and NCs aged 21.8 plus or minus 1.4 years, and 8 NCs aged 30.5 plus or minus 5.7 years participated in the study. The cyclists were the United States Cycling Federation category 4 through 2 on a scale of 5 to 1, with lower classification corresponding to a higher level of competition. The participants signed a medical history questionnaire, a PAR-Q fitness readiness questionnaire, and an IRB internal review board approved informed consent addressing experimental risks associated with the project. The subjects were given pre-test guidelines that included not eating or consuming caffeine for 3 hours before the exercise session and become hydrated, not measured. Statistical analysis. Despite statistics including mean and SD for demographic data and the physiological measures, Pearson conducted R correlation coefficients were run to determine the association between experimental testing variables and oxygen uptake measures obtained from the CE test versus mathematical calculations of oxygen uptake. Alpha was set to a priori, P is less than 0.015, and post hoc independent sample t-test was run to solidify correlation findings that the two measures, model versus actual, were not different. Results. Subject demographics, mean plus SD, can be seen in Table 1. The steady state VO2 requirements was determined for the Cs and NCs using equation 1, and the response for the plotted against time. Results are shown in Figure 1. The results followed the Phase 3 response to oxygen uptake kinetics. The oxygen uptake response to a step WR input was calculated using equation 2 from the data. VO2, WR minus CEs equals 48.39 milliliters per kg per minute. VO2, WR non-NCs 56.49 milliliters per kg per minute. O2 equals 0.53 minutes. Time is equal to 0.125 minutes, and T equals 4 minutes. The oxygen uptake responses for each stage was calculated from Cs and NCs, and the resultant values were compared to actual values as shown in Figure 2. The comparison of steady-state VO2 requirements between Cs and NCs using the mathematical model shows significant, P is less than or equal to 0.01, association between the results followed Phase 3 response of oxygen uptake kinetics. The Pearson product moment correlation analysis revealed a high correlation coefficient, R is 0.947. A post hoc analysis through an independent sample t-test did not reveal statistically significant differences between the model and the actual measures. These results indicate a mathematical model representative of oxygen uptake kinetics when compared to actual measures of oxygen consumption. Discussion. The determination of steady-state VO2 requirements using the mathematical model followed phase response of oxygen uptake kinetics. The steady-state VO2 requirements were higher for Cs when compared to NCs, with an increase in their exercise intensity. Yet, it should be noted that the time to exhaustion was longer with the trained Cs versus the untrained NCs. This may be explained through the demographic comparison between the groups, noting that the Cs were more massive, allowing for a greater O2 demand per unit of work. In addition, VO2 in the cycling group could be because of an increased activation of mass differences specific to the movement pattern of cycling. The comparison of steady-state VO2 requirements between Cs and NCs using the mathematical model revealed a high correlation coefficient, 0.947, and hence showed significant association between the actual measures and model measures. Considering the lack of information pertaining to the quantifying steady-state conditions, this experimental design, coupled with the mathematical model, allows for identifying steady-state conditions through ventilatory kinetics. The development of an integrated mathematical model for the determination quantifying steady-state conditions from other ventilatory parameters such as expired ventilation and respiratory quotient will enable the examination of several proposed mechanisms of steady state during exercise. Moreover, a system model approach, although more difficult than commonly used, reduced compartmental models, allowing for an underlying of interactions between compartments. In addition, future research may look at not only individual compartment contribution, but also various combinations of interactions related to oxygen uptake and bioenergetic involvement. The study found steady state conditions at every submaximal WR and would indicate subject acute adjustments to oxygen demand at various submaximal workloads. The current study also established the comparison of oxygen uptake kinetics between Cs and NCs during steady state for differences in WR. The responses of steady state VO2 requirements using the mathematical model were consistent with the phase response of oxygen uptake kinetics and revealed significant association to the experimental protocol. Thus, with this experimental protocol developed for the quantitative analysis of steady-state conditions being significantly associated with a recently developed mathematical model of the human bioenergetic system, a better understanding of steady-state using ventilatory kinetics has been established. Practical application. Steady-state has been a term used primarily in endurance-type conditions of athletics and exercise. Primary explanations of steady-state have been in qualitative, subjective formats. Practitioners in exercise venues may relate to steady state in the subjective format with a level of understanding, yet clinical and sport performance need a more precise level of steady state identification. Past research provides a lack of quantitative analysis of steady state. In addition, these descriptors have been achieved through visual analysis as opposed to quantitative scrutiny. With the advent of HR monitors, many endurance athletes and coaches use these devices in their training programs. Moreover, today's HR monitors are easily downloaded to a computer program for visual analysis. This research provides athletes and coaches a better understanding of the mechanisms behind steady state in trained Cs and untrained NCs. Subjects through the mathematical correlates of the model versus actual data, one can establish whether true steady-state conditions were obtained or adhered to during training session. Although, by using the models outlined in this research, compartmental O2 uptake and a system analysis of oxygen can provide information for enhancing training protocols. Too often, visual inspection may erroneously conclude that a period of steady state training regimens relying on cessation of steady state may lead to a maladaptation if reliance on subjective evaluation continues to model conditions that are not met. With an ever-increasing precision and measurement of training, this research may enhance the ability of coaches and athletes to monitor exact conditions of work output for optimal adaptation response.